The virtual rainbow brings together LGBTQ+ youth and their families, community leaders, professionals, and healthcare providers to learn and celebrate diversity and inclusion. Thank you for joining, everyone, and welcome.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to come and watch us here. Before we get started, we're just going to take some time to introduce ourselves as the facilitators today. Normally, we would leave an opportunity for you all to introduce yourselves as well, but based on the nature of the pre-recorded workshops and just how things are going now, unfortunately, we won't be able to do that, but we'll go ahead and model how we would have done that anyways, just so you all have that information. So we're going to go ahead and just share our name, our pronouns, and how we got connected to Empower Montana. And a reason that we share our pronouns in our introductions is because you can't always tell what pronouns a person goes by just by looking at them. And in our trainings, we really like to create a space where everyone feels welcome and valued and can be honored for who they are. And so we like to create this opportunity where we all get the chance to let each other know how we can refer to one another in the most affirming way. So we're going to go ahead and do that, but there's some more information on the slide about why we do introductions with pronouns and some examples if you might be confused. But I'm Spencer Czech. I'm the youth program specialist at Empower Montana. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I got connected to Empower Montana by attending a training similar to this one in my Social Work 200 class at the University of Montana. And being a gay male growing up in small town rural Montana, really quickly in my life, I felt like I was not represented in my community and there wasn't a way for me to make sure that my voice was heard and to also feel safe. And so when I found Empower Montana, I really started to learn how I could use my voice and how I could build pride in my own identity and how that can have a ripple effect and benefit others as well. So that's really how I got connected to Empower Montana. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to my other two facilitators here to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Lonnie Nielsen Cattell. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am the youth development coordinator at Empower Montana. And I actually started my journey with Empower Montana as a young person, going to our annual Empowering Youth Leadership Camp. And it's growing up, I had a younger brother with a pretty severe diagnosis of ADHD, and I never really felt like I had the language or the tools to advocate for him or just be a good sister to him. And I'm pretty grateful to Empower Montana because through their summer programs and after school programs and workshops in our youth and schools, I was given that language and the tools to be a leader and to be there with my younger brother and to also practice that with my fellow peers. So that is how I got connected with Empower Montana, and I continued to volunteer with them through high school, college, interned with them in graduate school, and now I work for them. So it's pretty great.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Dominguez. My pronouns are they, them, he, him, his. I got connected with Empower as a practicum student because of the master's program that I was in. But what was interesting is that I didn't know Empower Montana was a thing until a friend of mine told me about it. And she just thought that it was going to be a good place for me to be at. So I just tried it out, and then I've been here for 2 years with them, which I am very happy. I learned so much. But that's pretty much how I got connected by a friend.
Awesome. Oh, slide. All right, so who is Empower Montana? Our mission is, oh goodness, you can't even read that. There we go. Okay, so our mission is to create a more just and inclusive society, and we really do that through building youth and adult partnerships, and also just empowering people to really hone in their own leadership and correct those systemic inequalities, but also strengthen and empower others to be leaders in their communities. So we have 3 areas of work. We have youth in schools, businesses and organizations, and communities. Our youth in schools work looks a lot like kind of my story that I shared at the beginning. We offer workshops for students and educators and staff throughout the state of Montana to empower youth leadership, and that we do from grades 3 through 12. We also facilitate after-school groups. We have our Youth Advisory Council. We have Empowering People, Inspiring Change, our Youth Forward group, and our BU group for our LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit and Gender Diverse youth. And we, like I said, also do businesses and organizations where we do a lot of leadership development, cultural humility, and team building workshops with our businesses and organizations in the state. And we also host a few community celebrations each year. The first one is in January, where we celebrate our annual MLK Day with our racial justice group, IDEA. And then we also celebrate our Diversity Day, which celebrates our non-discrimination ordinance that passed in Missoula that was youth-led. But we also celebrate youth leadership during Diversity Day each year. And in the community, we also host workshops that are open to the community and facilitate conversations and do other community events as they are needed and arise. So our vision of what today looks like and how we're going to get there. Obviously today, we really just want to support you, and we're going to create a long-term collective impact by empowering you all with the skills and the knowledge and that language to transform the cultures in your schools and create more safe and equitable environments for our LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit and Gender Diverse youth. So our first goal today is that we're going to increase knowledge and awareness of the experiences that our LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit and Gender Diverse youth go through on a daily basis within our schools and outside of our schools. We're going to build a shared language and foundation of understanding around oppression and its impact on those youth. We're going to build tools for effective leadership, collaboration, and advocacy to create safe and inclusive school cultures, and identify what skills and actions are necessary to improve our systems of support for our LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit and Gender Diverse youth.
And in order to achieve these goals, we have some agreements, but first I want to talk a little bit about our methodology. And so our trainings are typically very experiential and participatory. Unfortunately, because of just the way that we have to do things this time around, we won't have the opportunity to participate. But I really do encourage you all to take some time, press pause in between activities, and really do a deep dive, maybe talk it through with a colleague, and just so that you can make sure that you get the most out of this presentation and the activities within. And really, while you do that, suspend all judgment and really lean into the judgmental thoughts that come up for you. We want this to be a space of learning and no shame, blame, or humiliation. And so bringing awareness of some of those negative or judgmental thoughts that might come to your mind is a huge first step in the whole reason that we're here together today. So I encourage you to participate in whatever way works for you during this session. That being said, we have some agreements. And so number one, I guess, is to listen with respect. And so, you know, usually our trainings are very conversation based, but even with just the three of us here today, you may hear something that we say that you don't necessarily agree with. So we just encourage you to listen with respect. A big component of our training is learning how to give each other the space to speak about your experiences and to just sit back and listen and develop a better understanding of where that person is coming from. And so I just encourage you all not to, or at least pay attention to feeling argumentative or defensive if anything comes up during this training, and to just listen with respect. Some of our other agreements, this especially applies if maybe you're watching this with some colleagues and you're participating in the activities. We really encourage you to create a confidential space. So if you are able to watch this with a colleague and talk about our next activity, which is called Frame of Reference, I really encourage you to honor confidentiality and enforce that in the space that you're in together. Oftentimes in our trainings, people end up sharing really vulnerable pieces of themselves or experiences that are really hard to talk about. And so just honoring that that person may not want people outside of this group that you're in to hear this information. So just keeping that in mind. And also, once you leave the space that you might be in, if you're with colleagues, make sure that you're asking permission to restart any conversations. Because we're able to set up a unique space here, someone might share something, like I said, that's really vulnerable and hard to talk about, and they may not be in the right space outside of the room that you're currently in. So just keep that in mind. Ask permission to restart any conversations that are sparked by today's session. But with that in mind, I think we can go ahead and get started with our first activity, frame of reference.
So for frame of reference, none of us is neutral or objective like we all strive to be, right? We all see the world through the lenses, sorry, the lenses of our lives, experiences, and social identity groups. Just like if you went to the doctor and get some prescribed lenses from your doctor, that person's like grabbing all your experiences that you're having through your life and everything you have seen or not seen and put them in like your own pair of glasses. And then our lenses create a frame of reference through which we experience, understand, and participate in the world. So the first step to build an inclusive work and service environment is understanding our own frame of reference. Not as easy as we think because we take so much for granted from our own cultural context. So for the first activity that we're gonna do, we'll have you engage in some self-reflection and answer a few questions on your own, just how this is built because it's a recording. So you can have some time to think about the following questions, and I can model them for you so you can kind of know what we're talking about. So for the first question, what are some of your most significant lenses? For me, is my gender identity, sexual orientation, and also my ethnicity. My ethnicity is like the most like impactful for me because it's obvious that my skin color is not white. So everybody could see that. And also like I like to express myself with those three identities because I cannot show you right now, but I normally wear fabulous clothes. So that's how I use those three lenses. So the other question too, it will be, what is the lens that might bring you confidence as a service provider working with LGBTQ youth? And I think once again, with the three significant lenses that I have is mostly like how I present myself, what I wear, and how I bring all those different lenses to the table for the youth to understand that it is okay to be you, that other people might not agree with you, but it's your life, not theirs. You're not affecting their life in any way. So if you bring yourself 100% of who you are, like you'll find the people that actually love you for who you are. And then the rest of them can just go somewhere else. Like they don't have to see you or anything. And then for another question is, what is a lens that might be a challenge or a barrier when working with LGBTQ youth? So something that I keep thinking about is my age. I don't know if many of you have thought of age as a lens, but I feel that sometimes just because I'm a bit older than most youth, they might see me as, oh, this is another person that's going to tell me that I'm not old enough to do something, or that I'm too young to understand what we're doing, or things like that. But that's the whole thing, like my age is not gonna prevent me from letting the youth know that they can do whatever they want, no matter what age they're in or what school they go to, because at any age you're able to accomplish so many goals or achievements that you want to do. Like you don't have to wait until you're like at 30 or 40 to do everything you want to do. So that's just the 3 questions that we want you all to answer. You can pause this video if you need some time to answer all those questions, and we will see you back in a bit. So welcome back. Now we would like to take some time to hear from a few folks. Actually, no, that's not right, because this is a video and probably I won't be able to hear you. But if you could kind of like reflect your own answers and kind of think about why you put those, or why you didn't put other lenses that you might have thought, that would be good. And then you can either put in the evaluation that we will have at the end, or you can also send us an email to kind of like answer your own reflection to us so we can kind of see like your own answers. And then for that debrief that you do by yourself, make sure you can also ask, do you learn or realize anything about yourself? What do you learn about others? And how might our frame hold us back from building relationships / help us? And then now that you already did this activity and have all that in mind, we'll go next to the cycle of oppression.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Johnny. And what I really like too about the frame of reference is that it really is an activity that you can, you don't have to just do once and be done. It is something that I do throughout my life, and it changes every time that I do it, because different identities or different lenses are more prevalent during different parts of your life. And so this activity can be done more than once, and it really helps helps you gain some perspective. So thank you so much. So before we actually start with the cycle of oppression, we want to get some terms so that we can have a collective vocabulary. And the cycle of oppression is a piece of theory that helps us understand how different forms of mistreatment get perpetuated into a cycle that is very difficult to break. But first, like I said, we're going to define some terms. So prejudice is our internal perspective based on experience or our lack of experience. It's our beliefs, values, thoughts, assumptions, anything that is internally in our brains. And prejudice comes from misinformation, missing information, or like I said earlier, our limited experiences. And we often ask everyone, can we live in a world without prejudice? And the answer is that not really. We all have prejudices, and sometimes they can be helpful, sometimes they are limiting, but we all have them. And the next term is discrimination. So discrimination is the external behavior that is informed by your internal perspective or your prejudice. So Discrimination is when we are acting upon those things. And we often ask, can we live in a world where we don't discriminate? And why or why not? And I think we can control our conscious behavior, but our behavior is unconsciously guided. So when we think about that, we think about the tone of our voices or our body posture, our facial expressions. We're not constantly thinking about those. And so even those can unconsciously show how we have a prejudice or how we can discriminate towards others. And we all discriminate at the very least unconsciously. And the more aware we are of our prejudices, the more we can control how they manifest in our behavior. So the next term is systematic. And systematic is that ongoing, cyclical, repetitive, historical, predictable cycle. And oppression, a lot of people have a hard time defining oppression, and we really see the gesture where people put both hands up and kind of make a downward motion as if they're holding something down. And that is the results from the misuse of institutional power and privilege, where one person or group benefits at the expense of another, or one group is holding another group down. And so those are our terms, and we're going to move on to walking through the cycle.
So now that we have those terms defined, we can sort of walk a group through the cycle of oppression. Usually we'd have this be interactive, and we'd create a space where folks can share stereotypes, missing information that they may have heard about a group. We won't be able to do that today, so we're sort of just going to talk you through what it might look like if we walked LGBTQ youth through the cycle of oppression. And so the cycle really doesn't have any beginning or end, but basically we want to assume that all of us are born good, innocent, and curious, and without judgment. But along the way, we learn a lot of misinformation, or we have very limited experiences. And so with this cycle, it'll help us better understand how that misinformation or missing information can translate into discrimination and ultimately systemic oppression. So we started misinformation because it's something that we can easily all relate to. And so if we think about where we get all of our information on a daily basis, we get our information from places like family, friends, from books, from television, from social media, all kinds of different things like that, church groups, school. And so we live in a time where we are constantly bombarded by information pretty much all day, every day. And so it's pretty safe to assume that all that information that we receive, not all of it is going to be true. And unfortunately, our brains are not sophisticated enough to just automatically filter out the untrue information and hold on to just the accurate and true information. And whether or not you believe it when you hear information, even if it's wrong, a record is created in your brain, and your brain holds on to that message, whether you actively believe it or think about it. And so it's really important that we talk about the misinformation that exists so that we can pay really close attention to how that might come up in the way we interact with people. And so if we think a little bit about some misinformation that exists about LGBTQ youth, let's see. I know that something that is tossed around a lot is, oh, it's just a phase. They're too young to know. Do you two have any examples of some misinformation?
Yeah, I think one other thing that I hear a lot, Spencer, is that they're engaging in sexual, like, risky behavior a lot. That is one thing that I hear pretty frequently. Like you said, I also hear that they're confused, that it's a phase, that there's also a lot of misinformation about just gender expression, I think, and how, like, if you are a lesbian, there's a certain way that you're supposed to look, or if you're gay, there's a certain way that you're supposed to act, whether you're more flamboyant or whether you have short hair. Yeah. What do you think, Johnny?
I think another one that I heard recently is that they think that they're being rebellious because they want to do what the parents are not going to agree with. So that's another one that I'm like, doesn't make sense why someone would want to be rebellious by being in an oppressed identity, but that's just like how people think, I guess.
Another one, something that I've heard that maybe is more relevant to older LGBTQ youth, but that they use a lot of drugs and alcohol. And so if we're thinking about all of this misinformation that exists about LGBTQ youth, eventually people start using this misinformation to justify the mistreatment of LGBTQ youth. And so if we think about what that mistreatment might look like, there's some examples up on the PowerPoint. So segregation, isolation, targeting, devaluing. I know that it's very prevalent among especially like trans women of color, targets of violence, hate crimes. But for mistreatment, we're really thinking about what it looks like on an individual person-to-person basis. Do you two have any other thoughts about the mistreatment of LGBTQ youth and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, we see it a lot in our schools. We hear a lot of like, I am going to say some words and I don't believe that these are appropriate, but I do hear them. You hear fag, dyke, you hear that's so gay. Those are like some pretty, or tranny, or some people asking, what's in between your legs for trans youth, or making it very hard for our youth to use the bathrooms or the locker rooms, or as like, going so far as blocking the restroom entrances or locking them into stalls or looking through the cracks of the stalls to see what they're doing. Those are some mistreatment that I have seen.
Anything to add, Johnny?
No,
Okay.
you two said everything.
Okay, awesome. So I'm sure that you all might think of some other things that we didn't mention, but the mistreatment of LGBTQ youth can look a lot of different ways. And so any of the things we just mentioned, also we talked about why it's so important to use pronouns. And so like refusing to use a young person's pronouns or the name that they ask you to call them by, those are other forms of mistreatment to LGBTQ youth. But so over time, all this misinformation continues to justify mistreatment, and this mistreatment becomes normalized. And in order to normalize it, it's put into laws, rules are created, policies are created. And so some examples of that might look like, and this can be either current or historical. So an example that I can think of is federally, there are no laws that protect LGBTQ people. There are state laws in local ordinances, but federally, we don't really have any protections. Another example I can think of is dress codes in school systems. I think dress codes are really set up to be binary and think of students as only male or female, and I don't think that leaves very much room for gender expansive youth or non-binary youth, or people who just express their gender in a way that doesn't typically seem like normal or match up with the stereotype of gender. Do you two have any other examples of the institutionalization?
I think in
Yeah.
particular with, sorry, Lonnie.
Go ahead, Johnny, you got it.
I think related to like sports and transgender community, I feel like there's starting to be laws that kind of prevent them from doing certain sports, just because they think it's not fair for the transgender community to do certain sports, I guess. So that's something that I've seen a lot lately.
Yeah. Another form of institutionalization, I think, would be our bathrooms and how there aren't any gender inclusive bathrooms. And I've heard of some schools and how they utilize these staff restrooms as safe spaces for trans youth who don't feel comfortable using the student bathrooms. Also, as an example of being an ally, I've also seen buttons that students wear that will have the trans flag and they'll say, "I'll go with you." So they're designated as a safe person that will go to the bathroom with some of our youth so that they aren't mistreated in the bathroom. But like I said earlier, I think that just the lack of gender inclusive bathrooms is one form of institutionalization.
So imagine you are an LGBTQ young person and you're hearing all this misinformation, you're experiencing firsthand all of this mistreatment, and you're noticing all of these institutions that seem to be set up to hold you back and to prevent you from being yourself. And so then comes the internalization of all these messages. And so if I'm an LGBTQ youth and I'm hearing all these things, I'm gonna start to feel some emotions. And some examples of those emotions might be hopelessness, anger, sadlessness. They may start to isolate. They may start to cope with these feelings using drugs and alcohol. What are some other feelings that you two can think of?
Not feeling safe going to the bathroom, so they could develop a urinary tract infection or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like you said, Spencer, that feeling of hopelessness, I feel like a lot of our youth feel really agitated, really angry, irritated. They may even, like you said, turn inward because they don't feel safe with others. And so they may isolate and just feel very lonely.
Yeah, and so as LGBTQ youth start to internalize and believe all these messages that they're hearing, then that sort of translates into the misinformation, because people use these internalized emotions to confirm their biases and prejudices against this group of people. And so if you're an LGBTQ young person and you're feeling really hopeless, maybe you're angry, you start to use drugs and alcohol to cope with the feelings, then people are going to look at that and say, see, that person is rebellious. They are rebellious. They do use drugs and alcohol. And so this is a sort of quick example of how the cycle of oppression works and how it works to continue to hold down groups of people. And something I just thought of that I wanted to add to internalization, a feeling that I think LGBTQ youth might feel a lot is tired. I think sometimes LGBTQ young people feel this burden of like correcting all this misinformation and standing up to this mistreatment when they see it, and that can be exhausting. And so that just continues to feed into misinformation and the mistreatment of LGBTQ youth.
Yeah. And Spencer, I'd also like to just note that this cycle can also be used, we just used it to highlight marginalized populations, but you can also use it to highlight like the dominant groups and how that is reoccurring too. So in internalization, we talked about how our LGBTQ youth or gender diverse youth are, feeling tired, lonely, angry, hopeless. But the dominant group, which would be the cisgender and the straight group, may internalize that they are better, that they are superior, that they are right in their relationships and in their gender identities and the way that they express their gender. And that just perpetuates how they are the ones that dress correctly. They are the ones that are able to share PDA, unlike a lot of our LGBTQ plus youth. They're the ones that are engaging in that mistreatment and institutionalization. Again, superior, they're the ones that are right. They're the ones that are making the rules and the policies and normalizing all of this. So that we did walk through the marginalized group, but you can also use it to highlight how the dominant group stays the dominant group. Awesome. So this cycle is extremely heavy, but we do have ways to interrupt this cycle. If we are to end systematic oppression or mistreatment of any group, we need to have leadership skills in several areas. So the first one is transforming our institutions. So in this example, we are utilizing our individual and collective strengths to recognize, challenge, and change inequitable policies and practices. And one example that Spencer actually uses a lot is that when we think of transforming institutions, we think of like this really big goal, right? We think Washington, D.C., we think all of these laws and going to Helena, and it doesn't actually have to be that. Our schools are institutions, and our institutions are made up of people. And so we can start small by just making sure that our schools are more inclusive and equitable and accessible for our LGBTQ plus youth. And that can be the first thing that we do is just we look at our school manuals, and we start there by implementing our sound policies and procedures and protocols in our school manuals, and then go from there. But some examples that we often use about policies are our Civil Rights Act or the Missoula Non-Discrimination Ordinance that we have, and there are a couple other places in Montana that do have non-discrimination ordinances. Spencer, do you know which is it? It's Missoula.
Helena.
Okay. Is that it?
I think Butte might, but I think that might be it.
So those are the only places that have a non-discrimination ordinance. And then again, like we said, your school policies. And our second area of interrupting the cycle of oppression is building and strengthening authentic relationships. And that's where we make a commitment to non-judgmentally reaching for and developing authentic relationships with people from diverse groups. And it's really important that we emphasize the authenticity and the genuineness of these relationships, because we don't want to make people feel or students feel like we are engaging in a relationship with them just so that we can learn from them. It is our responsibility as educators that are working with our youth to educate ourselves and not be constantly asking our youth these questions, because it isn't their responsibility to educate the world about their experiences, their gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation. It is our responsibility to do our own research and authentically cultivate these relationships with our young people so that we break down those stereotypes. And we learn best from those that we care about, honestly. So our next two skills are to cultivate resilience. And that's where we take the time to really evaluate our internalized messages. We really engage in critical self-reflection to think about why we're acting the way we're acting, why we're feeling the way we're feeling, what is coming up for us. I know, and this is an example where you can take out your frame of reference activity and maybe think of like where you're coming from and gain some perspective, so that you can take pride in your own identities and really model and helpfully model to your students that it is okay to be yourself and build that self-esteem. It is okay to be you, and to have that shared humanity, and to show that we're all human and we all make mistakes and we're all learning and we're all together in this, cycle of life, I guess you could call it. And then our next skill is positive communication skills, where we confront actions that build on these oppressive systems by engaging in discussions with people from a place of curiosity instead of judgment. And this can be very challenging. I know that in schools, it's really easy to go straight to judgment and to make assumptions. And it's really hard to just come from a place of, I want to learn why you're acting this way. I'm really curious what's coming up for you. And engage in a place where these students can voice their thoughts without feeling judged, so that you can engage in conversations to correct some misinformation or disinformation that these students may have learned from social media, from their parents, from families, friends, churches, from an outdated textbook, whichever. And we utilize our two skills called stopping the behavior and shifting attitudes. If you go onto our website, we can share a little bit more about those, but we don't really have the time to really go into those communication skills. But yeah, Johnny, Spencer, is there anything that I missed or anything that you all would like to add to these interruptions?
Yeah, one thing that I always like to add about positive communication skills is I think it's really easy to get discouraged and bogged down when people are resistant when you try to practice these communication skills, or when it feels like it didn't work. But I just encourage you all to think of it as you are planting seeds, and you may not get to be the one who sees those seeds sprout, but just know that you planted a seed. The next time that person uses that word or does what they did, they're going to think about the conversation they had with you. And just know that I know that a lot of times we want to leave the conversation feeling like, wow, I helped this person understand, I did the right thing. But just know that sometimes when we use these communication skills, it's really not for us. It could be for someone who's in the room, who's just hearing the conversation, who can be really impacted by the words being used. And so just taking the opportunity to step up, because the impact doesn't have to be seen in the person using the word or doing the behavior you want to correct.
Thanks, Spencer. Awesome. So we're going to discuss some best practices that we highlight a lot with our educators and counselors.
So some of the best practices that we have is to use the name and pronouns the young person asks you to. And it's okay to make mistakes, because, sometimes we have those habits that are really hard to move away from. So it is okay to make mistakes as long as you acknowledge that you made a mistake and you're willing to correct what you just did. And then don't be, don't don't feel bad if someone else corrects you. Just apologize for the mistake that you did and move on. You don't want to make it the attention, because this is not about you, which is important for you to think about. So just acknowledge the mistake and move on, and just try it next time. Another one is don't make assumptions about the gender and sexual orientation of the youth or anyone in general, because you don't know exactly unless you have asked already their gender and sexual orientation. So don't make assumptions, because you might be wrong. And then don't share about a person's gender identity or sexual orientation without explicit permission from them, because you can come across the likelihood of outing someone if they haven't, like, come out of the closet, how they say, to someone else that you're talking to. They probably just felt comfortable coming to you, but not another person or another group that they are involved in. So just make sure that you don't share that unless you are giving the permission to do so. Also ask open-ended questions and listen without showing judgment, because that's the best way to know that you're there to listen and actually know the person, not really judge them, because that could happen a lot if you don't think how to word your questions to. Like, you can sound very judgmental, which is not what you want to do when you want to get to know someone too, just because they could create a barrier for you to not, like, really know them for who they are. And then also confront your own stereotypes. How do you pronounce that word?
Prejudice.
Prejudice, and bias, even if it is uncomfortable to do so. And so for that one, like, if you find yourself thinking of a stereotype, you can also ask yourself those questions of, like, why did I think that way? Like, where did I learn that? And how can I, like, learn from it and move on to not make that mistake again.
Awesome.
And I know that in the last slide, one of our best practices was to ask open-ended questions, but the first best practice on this slide is don't rely on the young person to educate you about LGBTQ plus identities and issues. Seek out information elsewhere. I think it's really important that we are willing to ask questions, but we're also okay being told, I don't have the energy or the capacity to sit here and have this conversation with you right now. Like we said earlier, sometimes LGBTQ youth and gender diverse youth are constantly expected to explain themselves or validate their own identities, and sometimes they just don't have the energy to answer a question that you have, and that's okay. Second, welcome feedback and guidance. Like we said in the last best practices slide, you can make mistakes. It's probably likely that you are going to make mistakes, but really being open to feedback and welcoming it even from the youth that you're trying to support will be really important, because they know best about their world and their experiences and what feels good to them. So really welcoming that feedback and guidance is important. Be okay with being out of your comfort zone and knowledge base. It's all right to say you're new to these concepts. I think all of us are constantly on this continuum of growth, or this continuum of learning, and we all fall at different points on that continuum. And so just honoring that, like, maybe you're a little farther behind than the person you're having a conversation with. It's okay to acknowledge that, because by acknowledging that, it creates space for you to learn the information that you don't have right now. So really be okay with being outside of your comfort zone and your knowledge base. Next, demonstrate that you believe all people, regardless of gender identity and sexual orientation, should be treated with dignity and respect. I think LGBTQ youth are paying attention to the way that you talk about people, whether or not that's them. So if you're talking about a person maybe in history that was LGBTQ, really demonstrate that you believe that you think all people should be treated with dignity and respect, because they're going to see how you treat those people, and it's going to affect their willingness to open up and build a relationship with you. Next, introduce and respect pronouns that people want to use. You can introduce your pronouns verbally, on name tags, on email signatures. These are some examples. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but really just like creating this opportunity. Number one, it normalizes sharing pronouns. And number two, it really opens up the door to give people the opportunity to talk about this who might constantly have to correct people about their pronouns. And so just doing this little thing that you can as an ally to introduce your own pronouns to open up that door is really important.
Awesome. Thanks, Spencer. Okay, resources.
Yeah, so you can see up here on our PowerPoint that we've got some additional resources. And so if you have any more questions or you're looking for other supports, these are some awesome places to look to. Some of them are Montana specific, some of them are national organizations. You can also email us with any questions that you might have. Our email is right there. And I'll let Lonnie talk a little bit about the evaluation link.
Yeah, so Empower Montana is, like Spencer said, constantly on the continuum of growing and learning and bettering our programs and our workshops. And we are really interested in what you have to say about our workshops. So there on the PowerPoint, you will see an evaluation link. And usually during the end of our workshops, we have time for highlights, for sharing gratitude, and actual time for you to fill out our evaluations. But we don't really have that option right now. So we also usually take time at the end of our workshops to have a goal setting session, and we're unable to do that because this is a recording. So we really wanted to take advantage of sharing goals through our evaluation. So please feel free to share a goal on your eval. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can contact us via email, or you can share that constructive criticism or ask any questions on your evaluation so that we can make sure to answer those questions in our future workshops. And that is all that we have for you all today. You can see our contact information here up on our PowerPoint. We are also on social media. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. And we just really appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us here today and to learn how to make our schools more equitable and welcoming and safe for our LGBTQ+, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse youth. So, bye everybody. Thank you.